My name is Ingrid. Before you hear anything else about what happened, I need you to know that. I also need you to know that for 22 years, I built things. Not with bricks or steel, but with logic and light, with the silent, invisible architecture of data. I was good at it. I was, in fact, the best. And if you've ever felt like you were the only one holding the entire world together with nothing but sheer will and duct tape, maybe stick around for a few minutes. It helps to know you're not just screaming into the void. The end, when it came, didn't have the decency to be a dramatic storm. It was a sterile, quiet execution in a glass-walled conference room that always smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. The room was nicknamed the Aquarium, and on that Tuesday afternoon, I felt like the last fish. Richard sat across from me, his hands steepled under his chin in that practiced way he'd learned from a weekend CEO seminar. He was wearing a tie that cost more than my first car, a silk monstrosity of blue and gold that seemed to mock the fluorescent pallor of the room. He wasn't the founder, not the brains. He was the kind of man who inherited a finely tuned engine and thought his only job was to polish the hood. He said, "Ingrid, we're moving in a new strategic direction." It was a sentence so devoid of meaning it was almost a vacuum. It sucked the air from the room. He said, "As part of this corporate restructuring, your role has been made redundant." Redundant. The word hung in the air, ugly and blunt. I, who had designed and built the company's entire historical data archive, from a chaotic mess of disconnected spreadsheets and forgotten hard drives into a fortress of searchable, monetizable information. I, whose name was etched into the foundational code of every significant project for the last 2 decades. I was redundant, like an old-fashioned telephone or a spare tire. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I watched the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand as he pushed a crisp white envelope across the mahogany table. My severance package. The 30 pieces of silver. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. He said, "Obviously, we'll need you to hand over all documentation related to the archive. All schematics, access protocols, vendor contacts, the works." He tried for a smile, but it was a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, like polished river stones. He added, "And of course, any and all encryption keys. We need a seamless transition." A seamless transition. He wanted to pull the creator out from under the creation and expect it to just keep floating. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, a chilling, crystalline clarity. The shock was there, a low hum beneath the surface, but on top was a layer of ice. I nodded. Slowly. I said, "Of course, Richard, I'll get that all together for you. I'll need access to my system for a few hours to compile everything properly." He looked relieved. He thought this was going to be easy. That's the thing about men like Richard. They mistake composure for compliance. They mistake silence for surrender. He said, "Good. Excellent. Glad to see you're being a team player, even at the end. HR will be here in a moment to escort you to your desk." I gave him a small, tight smile of my own. It wasn't a real smile. It was a baring of teeth, a promise. I said, "No problem at all. You'll have everything you need," and I did give it to them. Hours later, after the humiliating walk past my former colleagues, their eyes either avoiding mine or filled with a pity that burned worse than anger, I sat at my desk for the last time. The HR rep, a young woman who looked barely old enough to vote, stood awkwardly by the door, a human sentinel guarding against some imagined corporate sabotage. She had no idea the real damage was already done. I compiled the documents. Every last one. The network diagrams, the API documentation, the maintenance schedules, the primary and secondary key trees for every database instance. I printed it all out, a stack of paper nearly a foot high, a forest of my own making. I boxed it up. I handed the HR rep my laptop, my keycard, my parking pass, my identity. What I didn't include, what wasn't written down on any piece of paper or stored in any file on that laptop, was the final decryption key. The one I had created just last month as part of a critical security upgrade I myself had championed. An upgrade Richard had approved with a wave of his hand because the words quantum-resistant encryption looked fantastic on a slide for the board of directors. He hadn't understood a single syllable of my presentation, but he understood the optics. Optics were everything to Richard. That final key wasn't a string of characters. It was a complex algorithmic seed, generated from a combination of biometric data and a passphrase derived from the last lines of a poem my father used to read to me. It existed in only one place inside my head. The company still had all of their data. Every petabyte, 22 years of research, transactions, client histories, and trade secrets. A digital King Solomon's mine. It was all safe. It was all secure. They just couldn't read it. They had the library, the shelves, the books. I just walked out the door with the only copy of the alphabet. As I walked out of that building for the last time, the automatic glass doors hissing shut behind me, I didn't look back. There was no need. I knew exactly what I had left behind. A fortress, a tomb, a monument to their own breathtaking arrogance, and a quiet, ticking clock. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that then, and I tell myself that now. It was about value, and they were about to get a masterclass in what they had just thrown away. The drive home was a blur, the city lights smeared into long, wet streaks of neon and white. I don't remember the traffic, the turns I took, the familiar route I had driven thousands of times. My mind was a static-filled television, replaying that one scene in the aquarium over and over. Richard's smug face, the word redundant, the condescending pat on the head in the form of a severance check. When I finally pulled into my designated spot in the concrete cavern of my apartment building's garage, I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, the only sound in the world. I rested my forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel, and that's when the ice finally broke. It wasn't a loud shattering crack, but a silent, internal fracturing. The composure I had worn like armor all afternoon dissolved, and the full weight of the last 22 years came crashing down on me. It wasn't just a job. Anyone who has ever truly built something knows this. It was a part of me. I remembered the beginning, when the archive was nothing more than a chaotic digital swamp. The company, then a much smaller, scrappier entity, had 2 decades of data spread across a Frankenstein's monster of legacy systems, personal hard drives, and forgotten servers humming away in a dusty closet. It was unusable, a liability. They were drowning in information but starving for wisdom. They hired me to organize it. That was the word the original CEO, a kind, brilliant man named Arthur, had used. He saw the potential, but he didn't have the vision to structure it. I did. For the first 3 years, I wasn't just a database architect. I was a digital archaeologist. I worked 16-hour days, fueled by stale coffee and the sheer thrill of the puzzle. I taught myself dead programming languages to extract data from fossilized systems. I interviewed retired employees to understand the logic behind their ancient, cryptic spreadsheets. My then-husband complained I was married to the job. He wasn't wrong. The marriage ended. The archive grew. I designed the architecture from the ground up. It wasn't just a storage facility. It was a living ecosystem. I built it to be modular, scalable, and intelligent. I created custom search algorithms that could find a single crucial data point from 10 years ago in under a second. I built predictive models based on historical trends that became the bedrock of the company's strategic planning. When Arthur sold the company and retired, he gave me a bonus and a handshake, telling me, "Ingrid, this place is built on the foundation you laid. Don't ever let anyone forget that." Then came Richard. Richard was a creature of a different species. He had an MBA from a school that mattered, and a smile that could charm a snake, but he viewed the company not as an engine to be understood, but as a throne to be sat upon. He didn't understand the how, he only understood the what. What can this do for my bottom line? What looks good on a quarterly report? He saw my archive not as a complex, nuanced creation, but as a magic box that spat out money. He didn't care how the magic worked, only that it did. The slights started small. In a major client meeting, after I'd spent a week preparing a deep dive analysis, he presented my slides as his own, fumbling through the technical explanations. When the client asked a pointed question he couldn't answer, he'd turn to me with a dismissive wave and say, "Ingrid, my data guru, can you handle the granular details?" He made me sound like an assistant, a glorified clerk, while he soaked up the credit for the strategy my analysis had enabled. It was a quiet, insidious form of theft, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. I let it happen. That's the part that stings the most. Looking back, I let it happen because I believed, with a foolish, misplaced loyalty, that the work was what mattered, the archive, the system. I thought that, as long as I was protecting and nurturing my creation, my own ego could take the hits. It's a trap so many competent women fall into. We think our work will speak for itself. It rarely does. It needs a voice. And I had allowed Richard to become its voice. My thoughts drifted to Maya. Sweet, brilliant Maya. She was a junior data analyst I had hired 2 years ago, fresh out of university. She had a fire in her eyes, a hunger to learn that reminded me of my younger self. I saw the same spark of architectural genius in her, the ability to see not just the data, an ocean of numbers, but the currents and tides within it. I took her under my wing, shielding her from the worst of the corporate politics, from the predatory credit stealing of middle managers, and the casual condescension of men like Richard. There was a time about 6 months ago when Richard had tried to assign her to a dead-end data cleansing project, a mind-numbing task usually given to interns. He wanted her off my team because she had, in a meeting, politely corrected a flawed assumption he'd made. His ego was bruised. I went to his office. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out the critical path of 3 major projects and showed him how Maya's skills were essential to all of them. I told him that reassigning her would create a 6-week delay on the Q3 revenue projections. I spoke his language. QAll, not people, but profit. Not talent, but timelines. He had relented, annoyed but cornered. He'd looked at me with a sour expression and said, "You're very protective of your people, Ingrid." It didn't sound like a compliment. He saw loyalty as a liability, a competing power base. After that, I started teaching Maya more discreetly, sending her encrypted articles and tutorials through a secure messaging app, giving her side projects that would build her skills outside the official view of management. I was preparing her, not for this apocalypse, but for the inevitable day when she would need to build her own ship, just as I had. Sitting there in the dark garage, the phantom smell of stale office coffee in my nostrils, I felt a hot, fresh wave of anger on her behalf. What would happen to her now, with me gone? Who would protect her from the Richards of the world? Who would see that spark and nurture it into a flame? The thought of her talent being snuffed out by this new strategic direction was more painful than my own termination. Then my phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration against the silent leather of the passenger seat. I picked it up, my thumb swiping across the screen with a clumsy, numb motion. It was a message from Maya on our secure app. The message wasn't long. It just said, "I heard. I'm so sorry, Ingrid. They have no idea what they've done. Are you okay?" And that was it. That was the catalyst. That small, simple question from a young woman I had tried to protect. Are you okay? No, I was not okay. But the despair that had been a cold, heavy blanket began to burn away, replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve. It settled deep in my bones, a core of Arctic steel. They have no idea what they've done. Maya was right. They didn't. They thought they had cut a redundant part from their machine. They had no idea they had just ripped out the engine and thrown away the key. My focus sharpened. The grief and the humiliation receded, leaving behind a pristine, uncluttered landscape for strategic thought. My mind, the same mind that had built their digital fortress, now began to design a new structure. A lever, a fulcrum, a way to move the world. It wasn't about revenge, it was about rebalancing the scales. It was about demonstrating, in the clearest and most undeniable terms, the catastrophic miscalculation they had made. They had erased my name from the org chart. I was about to erase their access to their own past, their own future, their own value. They had made me redundant. I was about to make them obsolete. I took a deep, steadying breath, the first one that didn't feel like I was breathing in shards of glass. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring back to life. It was time to go to work. My apartment was my sanctuary, a clean, well-lit space of minimalist furniture and meticulously organized books. It was a physical manifestation of my mind, everything in its place, everything with a purpose. For the next 2 days it became a war room. The white-hot anger had cooled into a focused, controlled energy. There was no more weeping, no more staring into the void. There was only the plan. The beauty of the plan was that I had started building it over a year ago. Not consciously, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a matter of professional prudence. Men like Richard create instability. Their egos are tectonic plates, always shifting, always threatening to cause an earthquake. And when you live on a fault line, you build your house to withstand the shake. My contingency plan was born out of a deep-seated belief in intellectual sovereignty. The archive was my life's work, a complex tapestry of code and logic. The thought of someone like Richard, or worse, some unqualified successor he might appoint, fumbling around inside it, breaking delicate connections, corrupting foundational data, it was a desecration. So I built a new lock for the cathedral doors. The quantum-resistant security upgrade was my masterpiece of Trojan horse engineering. I spent months researching next-generation encryption protocols. I wrote a white paper that was dense, intimidating, and filled with the kind of forward-looking jargon that executives love, because it makes them feel like visionaries. I outlined a multi-layered encryption strategy that would render the archive's most valuable, oldest data, the foundational research and development data from the Arthur era, impervious to brute force attacks for the foreseeable future. I presented it to Richard in his glass and steel office. I used charts and graphs that glowed with an optimistic blue. I spoke of proactive risk mitigation and future-proofing our core IP asset. He had nodded along, his eyes slightly glazed over, understanding maybe 1 word in 10. He didn't grasp the technical details of a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, but he understood the political capital. Being the CEO who quantum-proofed the company's data was a powerful talking point for investors and the board. He signed off on it without a single technical question. His only real query was, how long will this take, and will it cause any downtime? I assured him the process would be seamless, running in the background, with zero operational impact. Which was true. The system would re-encrypt the designated data blocks slowly, methodically, over the course of a month. The final piece of the architecture was the key itself. Standard encryption keys are just long strings of data, easily copied, easily lost. Mine was different. I designed a multi-factor authentication system for the final decryption protocol. It wasn't just a password. It was a dynamic, 3-part algorithmic seed. The first part was a static hardware token, a small, unassuming USB key I kept on my personal keychain. The second part was a live biometric signature from a specific fingerprint reader I owned. And the third, the most crucial part, was the passphrase, a string of 32 characters derived from a complex cipher applied to the last 2 stanzas of Ulysses by Tennyson, the poem my father, an engineer himself, loved, a poem about not yielding. This key system was never documented. It was, in my technical proposal, referred to as a proprietary generative key protocol, managed by the lead architect. Richard had read that line and nodded, seeing it as a sign of my ownership and accountability. He never once thought to ask, What happens if the lead architect is hit by a bus? Arrogance is a powerful blinder. In his world, people were interchangeable parts. He couldn't conceive of a system where one person was truly indispensable. Now, sitting at my sleek dining room table, which was covered in notes and diagrams, I began to activate the second phase of the plan, the network. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, but to my financial planner. I had been a diligent saver, my portfolio managed with the same meticulous care as my databases. I confirmed my liquid assets. I had enough to operate for 2 years without a single client. Freedom. Next, the Ally Network. My thoughts returned to Maya. I couldn't contact her directly about my plans. That would put her in an impossible position. But I didn't need to. In mentoring her, I had already armed her. I had taught her to be observant, to document everything, to understand the flow of information not just within the systems, but within the company itself. She was my silent, unknowing sensor inside the walls. She would see the chaos long before it hit the news. All I had to do was give her a safe harbor to aim for when the time came. So I spent the afternoon on a different kind of architecture. Corporate architecture. I spent 3 hours on the phone with a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property and tech startups. We incorporated a new company, a simple Delaware C Corp. I called it Aperture Data Solutions, a name that signified clarity, opening, and a new point of view. It was a shell, a vessel waiting to be filled. Cost, a few $1,000s. Value, incalculable. Then I turned my attention to the most important asset I had. It wasn't the archive, and it wasn't the key. It was the trust I had built with our clients. A company doesn't own a client relationship, the people who build it do. Richard never understood this. He thought the name on the building was what kept clients loyal. I knew better. They were loyal to the results, to the person who delivered those results time and time again. My prize client, my white whale, was Omnicorp, a massive global logistics firm whose business was worth tens of millions a year to us. Their entire predictive modeling for shipping routes was built on a platform I had custom designed for them, pulling from our historical archive. Their main contact was a woman named Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was the anti-Richard. Sharp, no nonsense, with a mind that cut straight to the heart of any issue. She was in her late 50s, a former systems engineer who had climbed the ladder through sheer, undeniable competence. She tolerated Richard's schmoozing, but respected my work. I remembered a tense video conference about a year ago. We were troubleshooting a complex data anomaly. Richard was trying to blame it on Omnicorp's internal systems, a classic political maneuver to deflect responsibility. I stayed quiet, running diagnostics in the background. After 10 minutes of his blustering, I found the issue, a subtle data corruption caused by a recent sloppy server update on our end. I broke in, calmly. I said, "Richard, the issue is on our side. I've located the corrupted block, and I'm pushing a patch now. Service will be restored in 5 minutes." There was a stunned silence. Richard's face on the screen went pale. Evelyn, on the other hand, had a slow smile spread across her face. She ignored Richard completely and spoke directly to me. "Thank you, Ingrid. That's why we pay you guys the big bucks. For people who can actually fix things. Send me the post-mortem report directly when you're done. Don't bother running it up your flagpole." That moment had been a turning point. Evelyn saw me. She saw past the corporate hierarchy and recognized the true source of value. From that day on, she would often email me directly with technical queries, bypassing the official channels and the account managers. I was her fixer, her trusted contact. I didn't need to poach her. I didn't need to badmouth my former company. All I had to do was create a vacuum and let her draw her own conclusions. The time wasn't right yet. First, the old company had to feel the pain. They had to try, and they had to fail. They had to understand, on a deep, visceral, and financial level, the void I had left behind. My new company existed. My finances were secure. My key ally was in place, even if she didn't know her role yet. My key client relationship was strong and waiting. All the pieces were on the board, arranged just so. The quiet coup was ready. All I had to do now was wait for the screaming to start. And I knew, with the certainty of a well-designed algorithm, that it would. The silence from my end was the most powerful first move I could possibly make. The first 2 weeks were quiet, eerily so. I used the time to build out the framework for Aperture data. I designed a logo, built a simple but elegant website, and set up the necessary cloud infrastructure. It was strangely liberating to be building something from scratch again, something that was entirely mine, with no bureaucracy, no politics, no Richard. I worked from a small sunlit corner of my apartment, a mug of good coffee, not the stale, burnt sludge from the office machine, always at my side. I went for long runs in the morning, clearing my head, feeling the city wake up around me. I was decompressing, shedding the skin of my old life, but I was also listening. The silence was a coiled snake, and I was waiting for the rattle. It came, as I knew it would, in the form of a message from Maya. It arrived late on a Wednesday night, just 2.5 weeks after my departure. The message on our secure app was short and electric. They're trying to access the legacy R&D data for the quarterly IP audit. They can't. I read the words and felt a cold, satisfying thrill. The audit, of course. It was a regulatory requirement, a deep dive into the company's intellectual property assets. And the crown jewels of that IP were all sitting in the oldest, most valuable part of the archive, the part I had locked down with my security upgrade. I typed back a simple reply: keep your head down, document what you see, don't offer to help. Maya's reply was instant, already on it. It's chaos. Richard is losing his mind. I could picture it perfectly. The frantic energy in the IT department. The hushed, panicked conversations in the hallways. Richard, his face a mask of strained bonhomie, telling the board it was a minor technical glitch, a transient server-side issue. He would have brought in their top internal engineers, the ones who were good at maintenance, but had no idea about the deep architecture. They would be running diagnostics, checking network logs, rebooting servers. They would be like a team of mechanics trying to fix a spaceship by checking the tire pressure. They were looking for a problem in the hardware, but the problem was one of philosophy. They lacked the key, but more importantly, they lacked the understanding of the lock. A day later, another message from Maya. They hired an external cybersecurity firm. Big name, costing a fortune. They've been here all day. They think the data is corrupted. Corrupted? I had to smile. It was the perfect red herring. My encryption would look like random, meaningless noise to them. It was a common and plausibly deniable misdiagnosis. The consultants would spend days, maybe weeks, running useless recovery algorithms, billing by the hour, and ultimately producing a report that said the data was irretrievably lost. This was a crucial part of the process. The company had to exhaust all its other options. It had to spend a significant amount of money proving to itself that it was helpless. Every dollar they spent on those useless consultants was another brick in the wall of their self-made prison. During this time, I received a few calls from unknown numbers. I let them go to voicemail. The messages were from Richard. The first one was clipped and professional. Ingrid, it's Richard. Give me a call. We need to discuss the archive transition. The second, a day later, was more strained. Ingrid, call me back immediately. It's urgent. The third, left on a Friday afternoon, was frayed at the edges, the sound of a man trying to keep his voice from cracking. Ingrid, for God's sake, pick up the phone. What did you do? I saved that last one. The plausible inaccuracy of their technical approach was a delicious, calculated element. They were likely treating it as a ransomware attack without a ransom note, or a catastrophic failure of the storage array's integrity checks. Someone would be debating if the RAID controller had failed, writing garbage data to all the drives. Others would argue it was a firmware bug. The well-actually crowd in their IT department would be having a field day, each one proposing a different wrong theory, each theory leading them further down a dead-end path. It was a beautiful, self-sustaining cycle of incompetence. The time was almost right. They had failed internally. They were failing with expensive external help. The pressure from the board over the audit must have been immense. The next domino to fall had to be the client. I drafted a simple 2-sentence email. I read it over a dozen times, polishing it until it was as smooth and sharp as a shard of glass. I sent it to one person, Evelyn Reed at Omnicorp. Her private email address, the one she had given me after the data anomaly incident. The email said, "Evelyn, I am now operating independently. The door is open if you need it. Regards, Ingrid." I hit send, and then I went to make coffee. I didn't sit and stare at my inbox. That would be an amateur move. The seed was planted. Now, I just had to wait for it to sprout. It took less than an hour. My phone rang. The caller ID said Evelyn Reed. I let it ring 3 times, took a slow, calming breath, and answered. I said, "Ingrid speaking." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, crisp, direct, no time for nonsense. "Ingrid, I got your email. What the hell is going on over there? I've been trying to get a straight answer out of Richard for a week about a critical data request, and all I'm getting is corporate gibberish about system upgrades." I kept my voice calm and professional. I said, "I'm no longer with the company, Evelyn. My position was eliminated as part of a restructuring." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, a short, sharp, incredulous laugh. "You're kidding me. They fired you? The only person in that entire building who knows how anything works? Are they insane?" I didn't answer the question directly. I just said, "I'm afraid I can't speak to their internal decision-making processes." She made a noise of disgust. "Decision-making. Right. So let me guess. They can't access the data we need because you're not there to hold their hands." Again, I was careful. "I have no visibility into their current operational status." Evelyn was too smart for that. She cut through the corporate speak. "Bull, you built that entire system. You know its every secret. They've locked themselves out of their own house, haven't they?" This was the moment, the turning point. I said, "What I can tell you, Evelyn, is that Aperture Data Solutions is now operational. We specialize in bespoke data architecture and strategic insight. We are, for all intents and purposes, open for business." I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. She was connecting the dots, seeing the shape of the new reality. She said, "Send me a 1-page capabilities statement and a preliminary consulting agreement. I'm scheduling a meeting with my CTO for tomorrow morning. Be ready." She hung up. I stood there in my sunlit kitchen, the phone still in my hand. It was happening. The silent takeover wasn't a hostile act. It was a magnetic one. I wasn't stealing a client. I was simply standing still, and the true source of value in the ecosystem, the client who understood competence, was naturally realigning itself toward me. The old company hadn't just lost an employee, they had lost their gravitational center. And everything was about to start flying apart. The contract with Omnicorp was signed less than 72 hours later. It was a thing of beauty, drafted by my lawyer with surgical precision. It wasn't a simple retainer. It was a strategic partnership agreement. Aperture Data Solutions was tasked with reconstituting and modeling critical logistical data to ensure operational continuity for Omnicorp's global supply chain. The language was crucial. We weren't recovering the old data. We were creating new value, a new system, based on my intrinsic knowledge of their needs and the architecture I had already built in my head. The contract was worth more in its first year than my previous 5 years' salary combined. The news of Omnicorp's shift hit my old company like a shock wave. It wasn't public knowledge yet, but in the tight-knit world of enterprise tech, secrets don't last long. Maya sent me another message. "Rumor is we lost Omnicorp. Is it true? The board is calling an emergency meeting. Richard hasn't come out of his office all day." The panic had now become an exodus. Omnicorp wasn't just a client, They were a bellwether. Their departure sent a signal to the market that the ship was not only rudderless, but sinking. This is when Richard made his most foolish, most predictable move. My phone rang. It was him. This time, I answered. His voice was a strange cocktail of feigned authority and raw panic. "Ingrid, we need to talk." I said nothing. I just let the silence hang there. He continued, his voice tight. "I've just been informed that you've engaged with Omnicorp. You are in breach of your non-compete agreement. Our legal team is drafting a cease and desist letter as we speak." This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the trap I had so carefully laid. The non-compete clause in my employment contract was, like most in our state, legally dubious and difficult to enforce. But that wasn't my real defense. I let a beat of silence pass before I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Richard, I'd suggest you have your legal team read my severance agreement before they waste any more of the company's money. Specifically, paragraph 4, subsection C. The one you initialed yourself." There was a frantic rustling of paper on his end of the line. I knew the clause by heart. My lawyer had helped me draft it. It was a reciprocal non-disparagement and non-interference clause. Crucially, it stated that should the company terminate my employment without cause, all post-employment restrictions, including the non-compete and non-solicitation clauses, were rendered null and void. My termination letter, the one he had so smugly pushed across the table, explicitly stated my role was made redundant as part of a restructuring. It was the legal definition of without cause. In his haste to get rid of me, in his arrogant belief that I was a powerless, interchangeable part, he had signed my release papers. He had handed me the keys to my own kingdom. The silence on the phone stretched for a full 10 seconds. I could hear his breathing, ragged and shallow. He knew. He had been outmaneuvered. The legal threat, his last remaining weapon, had just evaporated. His tone shifted instantly. The bluster vanished, replaced by a desperate, wheedling plea. Okay, Ingrid. Listen, let's be reasonable here. There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding. The restructuring, it was a mistake. We want you to come back. We'll double your salary. A vice president title. VP of Data Architecture. Whatever you want. We need the key. Please, Ingrid. Just give us the key. It was pathetic. The powerful CEO, the master of the universe, reduced to begging. He still didn't get it. He thought the problem was a key, a string of characters he could punch into a computer to make the magic box work again. I said, "It was never about the key, Richard. The key is worthless." "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's not worthless. It unlocks the archive. The value," I said, my voice dropping a little, becoming colder, harder, "was never the data. The data is just a record of the past. The value was the architect, the one who could not only read the old blueprints, but draw the new ones. You didn't just fire an employee, Richard. You fired the entire foundation of your company, and you did it for optics." He started to sputter, to offer more money, a bigger title, a seat on some meaningless committee. It was the desperate thrashing of a drowning man. I cut him off. "I have a meeting to prepare for, Richard, with my new client." I hung up. The power shift was complete. It wasn't a battle I had won. It was a truth I had revealed. The company's power was an illusion, built on my competence. By removing me, they had shattered the illusion themselves. The client exodus was not an act of theft. It was a flight to stability, a flight to value. My value. I agreed to one last meeting, not because he had anything to offer me, but because I needed to close the loop. I needed to look him in the eye. I chose the place, a small neutral cafe downtown, far from the corporate towers. I chose the time 7 in the morning, before the city's hustle began. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a tiny table, looking rumpled and exhausted. His expensive suit was creased. His power tie was slightly askew. He looked smaller, somehow, without the trappings of his corner office. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. I didn't sit down. I stood across the table from him. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He started to speak, the pleading tone from the phone call returning. Ingrid, please. There has to be a way. Name your price. A consulting fee. A percentage of the company. Anything. Just help us. I let him finish. I let the desperate words hang in the quiet air of the cafe, mingling with the smell of roasting coffee beans. When he was done, I looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, but with a kind of detached clarity. I said, there is no price, Richard. You don't have anything I want. But the data, the company, I shook my head slowly. You still think this is about data. You think you can buy back the past, but the past is gone. The only thing that matters is the future, and the ability to build it. You don't value builders, Richard. You only value the buildings after they're finished. You see people like me as a cost center, not an asset. That was your mistake. He slumped in his chair, defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He just stared into his cold coffee cup. I remembered something he had said to me in my last performance review, a piece of patronizing advice he had offered with a smug little smile. He had told me, Ingrid, you need to be more focused on the big picture. Don't get so lost in the weeds. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. I said, you know, Richard, you were right about one thing. It's important to focus on the big picture, and from where I'm standing, the picture looks pretty clear. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving him there with his coffee and the ruins of his own making. I didn't look back. 2 days later, I got a message from Maya. It was a link to a press release. The company's board of directors had announced a major leadership change. Richard was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. It was the corporate equivalent of being taken out into a field and shot. His unqualified successor, Chloe, the niece he had installed in a senior position, was also gone, eliminated in the new streamlined management structure. The house of cards had well and truly collapsed, brought down not by a hurricane, but by the quiet, inexorable force of gravity. My new office is clean and bright, with a large window that overlooks the river. It's smaller than my old one, but every object in it is mine. The whiteboard on the wall is covered in diagrams, the beginnings of a new architecture, more elegant and powerful than the last. Aperture Data Solutions has 3 employees now, me, a sharp young lawyer who works on contract, and Maya. She had resigned the day after Richard was fired, sending a polite, professional email and walking out with her head held high. She called me an hour later, and I offered her a job as my first full-time hire. Director of Analytics. Her joy was a bright, beautiful thing. We stand in front of the whiteboard, markers in hand, debating the merits of different data flow models. She challenges one of my assumptions, pointing out a potential bottleneck. She's right. I smile. This is what it's supposed to be. A collaboration of minds, a partnership built on respect and competence, not a kingdom ruled by ego. There's a small, simple frame on my desk. It doesn't hold a picture of family or a motivational quote. It holds the first check from Omnicorp, made out to Aperture Data Solutions, signed by Evelyn Reed. It's not about the money. It's a symbol, a reminder. It's the proof that value is real, and sooner or later, it always finds its level. It was never about revenge. I have to believe that. Revenge is a destructive act. It's about tearing something down. What I did was an act of creation. I built a lifeboat, and when the ship I was on, the ship that Richard had steered directly toward an iceberg of his own arrogance, began to sink, I simply rowed my lifeboat to a safer shore. It wasn't my fault that all the most valuable passengers and cargo decided to come with me. They weren't loyal to the sinking ship. They were loyal to the navigator who knew the way home. So if you're out there, in a job where you feel invisible, where your work is taken for granted, where you are the foundation holding up a building run by people who don't even know your name, listen to me. Don't wait for them to recognize your value. They won't. Their world is built on a different operating system. You can't just ask for respect from people who don't have any to give. Instead, build your own system. Build your own tools. Document your worth, not for them, but for you. Forge your own alliances, based on competence and mutual respect, and build your own lifeboat. You might not ever need it, but if the day comes when they decide you are redundant, you won't be standing on the deck of a sinking ship. You'll be at the helm of your own, ready to sail toward a clearer horizon. Your value isn't something they give you, it's something you own. Never ever let them forget that. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the undervalued architect in your own life, do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know I'm not alone in this. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you had to prove your own value. I read every single one, and if you want to see more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your power, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. It's time we all stopped asking for a seat at the table and started building our own.